Wonderful to be surrounded by this glorious artwork. I have admired the artwork of James Hickey for some time, and it's beautiful to be surrounded by it. So today we invite you into a service that we did about once a month for many years here in James Chapel. At Table, as we call it, was born of a collaboration between Janet Walton, Professor Janet Walton, Professor of Worship, and Professor Hal Taussig, a visiting professor of Bible. It built on Hal Taussig's work on the earliest Christian meals. As he was looking at those meals, he began to understand that the church really was born at table. Before there were liturgy, before there was the Gospels, there was the meal. And we see glimpses of it in the letters of Paul. And Taussig expanded on those glimpses with other extensive research into the contemporary meals in Roman culture. What we know is when the earliest Christians came together, there was food, and people would recline at the table, resting up against one another. They were often loud and boisterous, extending late into the night. And around these tables, people would tell the stories that matter. How they were doing, what had happened, and what they remembered. They sang, they prayed, and I'm sure they laughed and cried. And these meals gave them what they needed to carry on in the grace of God. So Taussig and Walton designed At Table to do this in miniature, to gather around food, to hear what's on people's hearts and minds, to pray, to sing, to tell a story, to talk to one another, and to take the strength from this table for the day ahead. So that's what we do today. Before we talk again, take a moment to introduce yourselves to those around your table if you haven't. I think everybody at each table knows each other, but just say hi and take a snack, and we'll continue on in just a minute.
I'm actually pivoting from 22 years in corporate fashion. Yeah, my life kind of changed in 2020. I lost my mother. I gave birth in the pandemic. Yeah. And so I want to work to be an advocate for mental health and mental illness in the Black church.
All right. So as part of this service, we also have an opportunity to share what's kind of on our hearts and on our and our concerns in this moment in all the different ways, particularly as we hold one another in community in this moment. I know right now, as somebody who is currently a third year who's been in thesis mode now for about a month straight and like barely coming up for air, that's right now the concern I bring to this space and the hope that I can dig myself out of it, out of the sheer amount of work and just other things, and make sure that I do the work that I have been trying to do in a way that is successful and that communicates the story that I want to tell. So that's personally the concern I am bringing to this space. But what is great about this, and the reason we have the mic, is that if you also want to articulate a hope or a concern kind of into this space, this microphone's here, and you are more than welcome to.
Thank you. I guess in hearing what I've been hearing all day, I'm visiting potential admitted, waiting for apply for the acceptance, the certificate program. But just hearing the passion, and I've been hearing a lot of change in perspectives of career. So a concern of mine right now is, am I in the right assignment? Am I doing what I've been called to do, and not just something that's not just taking comfort or satisfaction or even hiding in something that I just tend to do well. And I want to be where God has assigned me to be and meaningful. And I believe that when I am in that place, that there'll be that inner satisfaction. Right now, my job is one that I can do well, and almost to the extent of boredom. So I know that that's not the real me, because it doesn't, emanate that passion.
You're also just welcome to share within your table and in this community. So this is both a inter-share into your little table space, or also with the wider group.
I'm faculty here at Union, and some of you know me and some of you don't. My name is Aliou Nyang, and I'm from Senegal, West Africa, and has been at Union since 2011. And this is Elizabeth, my wife, and this is a mentor, teacher. We really missed him. Yes, we do. And so it was inspiring, the hospitality he extended to us, and taking us to church, helping us adjust to New York. It's something you never forget. Just like the meal we're sharing right now is something that I believe should be etched in our memory to remember each other. And so I'm teaching and I'm learning a lot from my students. One of them is here, and Alicia, who surprised us with a powerful presentation, a reminder that God is with us. But also I want us to think of something. The violence happening around the world, people are dying, weapons are destroying space and bodies. I hope the ancestors forgive us, because they're wondering what we're doing. They're wondering what kind of world we will be leaving to the next generation. So may the ancestors be with us here as they hear us share the depth of our concerns.
When I look at the food, at home when I eat food, sometimes I have my phone in front of me. I look at some videos and my dad always says that when you eat, your concentration should be only on the food, because when I ask you next time what did you eat, you should remember what you ate. So so I tried not to do anything and just eat. And it'll always be like, because some people, they don't know whether they'll have a next meal. So when you have the food before you, you have to remember it and you have to eat it, and you'll be grateful and not be distracted, but give the attention to the food.
Let me add something. I didn't see Emma. I'm sorry. Yeah, Emma is in my New Testament intro, doing a fabulous work. It's a joy to see them guide the class.
Thank you all for sharing, and thanks for bringing all of this into the space. Let's just take a moment to breathe. Holy One, we give thanks for the people and everything that is brought to these tables, and pray for your grace and blessing on us. Amen. Facundo, would you lead us in a song? I think you have it, if you got the QR code on the way in, Blackbird. It's a song the Beatles made famous, and you may have heard it recently in a Beyonce version. I hope the melody is in your ears already.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly, into the light of a dark night. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly, into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise.
Thank you. I want to tell you a short story about Chris and a blackbird. You probably heard about Chris. Christian Cooper. He was in the news at the height of the COVID pandemic in May of 2020. Chris is a birder, and a very serious one. Do you remember this story? Yes, I'm seeing nods. He was the kind of guy that would get up at 5 a.m. and run to the Ramble in Central Park to catch a glimpse of a morning warbler. And during the pandemic, many of the older, longtime birders and other people that went to the park wouldn't go. They were holed up in their apartments. So fewer and fewer people were in the park, but people with new dogs who got them to keep them company during the pandemic were all over the park, and the dog parks were locked. So the dogs were often off-leash in areas that they weren't supposed to be. You probably remember this encounter. Chris is going out early in the morning to find a bird, and he meets one of these dogs off-leash. And he asks the owner to leash it. She becomes hostile, calls the police, and Chris, a black man, is said to be threatening her. She gets more and more belligerent. He stands apart and films the encounter. The video goes viral. And what could have had tragic consequences for a black man accused of attacking a white woman in Central Park gave us instead an invitation to listen with Chris. We began to ask ourselves a bit about Chris, and Chris told us about himself. He wrote a book. He's leading a National Geographic program now about birding. And he talks about himself. Before there was Chris Cooper in Central Park, there was Chris growing up in a suburban neighborhood on Long Island. 9 years old, in a summer workshop camp, woodworking camp, he built a birdhouse. And no sooner had he put it in the backyard, but it attracted a blackbird with a red patch on its wing. Chris describes this as his spark bird, the bird that brought him to a lifetime of interest in birds. A blackbird singing in the night. Chris memorized that song and listened for it, a familiar cry, the voice of a friend. And that song was an invitation to find himself, to imagine who he was. And for Chris, that was not easy. Son of a protective, conservative mom and a domineering, explosive father, he was a gay black boy living in a world where there seemed to be no one like himself. But attending to the sounds, those flashes of colors, reading, studying, thinking about their coming and going, poring over the Peterson's Field Guide to Birds, Chris tuned his soul to connect to the world through the appearances and disappearances of these small feathered creatures. Chris writes that birding shifts your perceptions, adding new layers of meaning and brokering connections between sound and season across far-flung places and between who we are as people and a wild world that both transcends and embraces us. He says, in my life, it has been a window into the wondrous. Attention, listening, waiting, connecting, knowing you have a place, knowing you're invited into a window to the wondrous. I tell this story about Chris because it reminds me of where we are in the stories we are telling in my congregation and others. We're living through these stories after Easter, a time after an end when Jesus was taken and crucified, and a time before the beginning where those who follow Jesus aren't quite sure what's next. Something happened, there's no going back, but what's forward? So we hear stories of people hiding and arguing, going back to old jobs, and then moments where a spark breaks in, like a blackbird singing in the night. So in the midst of a liminal void between what was and what will be, we hear a voice that comes as in the dead of the night, out of nowhere. A sound we recognize at the same time that we know it can't be. We have stories, a teacher, a friend, the Messiah, whom we've known appears, disappears, a ghost, but flesh, a gardener, a stranger on the road. He comes and goes, unrecognized and recognized, mistaken and then certain. In the passage that we'll hear in my church on Sunday, a handful of Jesus' closest are gathered in a room, and Jesus comes, he asks for food, they touch his flesh, they sit and eat, and they talk about what's next. They leave with blessing and purpose. For Chris Cooper, the blackbird was a spark, elusive, yet near as the bush at our side, willing to join him for a meal in that backyard and leave him with the courage to be. In this moment, I wonder, when much is to be done and the future is not yet, for what do we listen? What is our spark bird? How are our souls tuned to listen for the comings and goings of the Spirit? So take a few minutes, not long, but take a few minutes just to say to one another, what is the divine spark that meets you when you least expect it, gives you the grace to step into the future? Do you have a story of that spark? Take a minute and talk to one another. We're coming close to the end of chapel, and Professor Niang is going to send us out with a blessing. And I could say so many wonderful things about this man as well, who has been a friend and a colleague and has inspired me in many ways. He'll send us out with a blessing, but you're welcome to stay, eat, continue to have conversations as long as you like.
Thank you so much for sharing and for reflecting on everything that God has been doing in you and in your communities. After the end, before the beginning. And this is a prayer for us to take away something, and that is, in the same way, the God of ancestors, the divine God who is now being hospitable and receiving our ancestors who have passed, the elders who invoked God under a baobab tree or the sacred spaces, so does Dr. Troy Messenger, a teacher, an elder, and a mentor, who mentored many here at Union Theological Seminary. So as we go from here to what we do, may we embody the words of wisdom we heard from our mentor and elder. Wisdom that I hope we will embody as we go. And the divine presence here, and the presence of our ancestors who are here also, listening to what we're saying and what we have not voiced out. Send us with the wisdom that we just heard from each other and from our mentor. May the tables in your families, the tables in your communities be filled with the presence of the poor, with the presence of persons with different abilities, and so will be after the end, before the beginning. Amen. Go in peace.